Morning, everyone. I'm Paul Beyer from GAI Insights, and welcome to our daily Gen AI news briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items to save you time and keep you current. Our team of AI analysts rate each article essential, important, or optional. Our briefing today is sponsored by GAI Insights, and David is our leader. Dave.
All right. Thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. We have some really interesting articles today. We'll be talking about some new coding tools. We'll be getting into the chip wars. And there's one article that I feel like we could spend an entire episode on, and maybe we will at some point, which is kind of discussing the open source versus closed source debate, and delivers some use cases that are live at various companies using open source. So we will start with a coding tool. Oh, actually, we're not starting. Yes, we are starting with a coding tool. And this one will be Luda, but kick us off, Ankash.
Yeah. So the first one is from Meta. So Meta, they have released Cod Llama 70 billion parameter model. And according to some sources, it is already competing with uh, ChatGPT or GPT-4. So yeah, that's a sort of a big development.
All right. I believe, Luda, we're going to you first.
Sure. I rated this article as important for several reasons. One, I really believe that code generation has emerged as one of the applications of generative AI and AI in general. And this particular release actually puts it even more in the spotlight and enables a lot of people who are currently experimenting with code generation to actually use it. So I feel that it's important to flag that this is available and happening. And it will penetrate not only the areas of just software, but any enterprise development that folks will be putting on the open source LLM models.
All right. Any other differing opinions?
I just note, I think it's a really important experiment to watch. We have this big debate about, are they going to be specialized large language models or not? Bloomberg built one specially just for finance. Mayo Clinic's doing it for medical. And now we've got this intergalactic war with these high-tech companies all trying to one-up each other on code generation one. So I think it feels inevitable, given the intensity and importance of that we will start seeing code generation specific models outperform general ones, but it's not there yet, and it's great to watch. So I think it's an important trend on the general versus specific.
Well, I think in this particular case, it's somewhat easier to avoid the necessity to fine tune a model for your specific application. So there's a difference, fine tuning the model and training it with additional data. So I think here they fine tuned the general LLM model already for the generic code generation, for the Python, and they can do other languages. So that's fine tuning for code generation in general. If you are in the CRM or whatever business, right, in software, you will need to probably apply another layer of training it on your specific data sets and how you approach customers and blah, blah, blah. So that might be 3 layers in what I see in the software space.
Yeah, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm more practical. If I'm CTO at Fidelity, I have 5,000 developers. Am I buying GitHub Copilot at $20 a month for all 5,000? Am I going to open source? Am I? I think the challenge with these developers are these things have a cost. So if we agree this is all power tools for my coders, and I have 1,000 I've got 3 software companies right now, and they're trying to justify the GitHub thing. They only have a couple hundred.
I think you have to start small. Evaluate.
I'm sorry.
I think you have to start small, evaluate. You don't give it to 5,000 people overnight. you start to do some trials and testing to see if the productivity, if the ROI is going to be there for giving it to all 5,000 of them. I think you probably want to plan on that as a possibility, depending upon how productive it is. But you got to see where that goes. There's just not enough known yet. I personally rated this as optional. There's going to be one of these a week. We just had one yesterday. This is interesting, but it's not revolutionary.
Yeah.
And it is open source. It's Llama open source, which has other issues. So it's good, and that's all fine, but it doesn't outperform. They sort of claim it's close to ChatGPT 4 and the tweet on it, but it's actually not. If you look at the updated specs, ChatGPT 4 is still quite a bit ahead. So it's not, and it's certainly not astoundingly better. It's maybe at par, which would be interesting because the open sources are catching up. But again, we've seen that over and over. So I think the trend is important. I think we've said, generating code is likely to be, if not the number one use, certainly in the top 3. I think this particular release is interesting but optional for our staff. They're going to start their trials. They're unlikely to start their trials with this. They would more likely start, the CTO of Fidelity would more likely start with Microsoft or something that's out of the box usable as a trial.
If I may jump in, thanks. I actually agree here with Tim. I rate it as optional. I think if every time we hear something like this, we call it important, we're going to be flagging a lot of news, probably a little bit too much. What I found interesting, and this goes back to last night's conversation, let's see if I can remember what I was going to say, is we're talking about that reduction in the compute from 100 to 60% for the inference, and that incremental cost savings, even if it's doubling the amount that you get for your money versus the orders of magnitude you get by implementing anything at this point. We're just not at the point yet where this is really making a difference, right? Within my own company, when we were looking at the cost justification for the Copilot licenses for our developers, I think the business case was like don't quote me, but 15,000% ROI or something. When you talk about the amount of time you can save a developer, so whether we're talking about, or even if it's only hundreds of percent, but when you make a business case for developers using one of these tools, it's off the charts. And whether it's off the charts or double off the charts, at this point, they're going to go with whatever they feel most comfortable with, whatever they can most effectively implement in their ecosystem.
Well, speaking of which, hang on to that thought, Adam, because you'll actually talk to the next article as well, which is another tool that's hitting the space. So we'll go optional on this one. That seems to be the majority. But Ankaj,
I will live with optional. That's okay.
We convinced you. So Ankaj, just introduce this next one, and then Adam, continue your thoughts here.
Sure, Dave. So the next one is from Refect. So they have launched a tool which aims to make code generation more appealing to enterprises.
All right, so Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Ankaj. Again, I would say this is interesting but optional. So the real deal here that I guess you could say their unique selling position, right? You've got GitHub Copilot, Amazon has their Code Whisperer. There's lots of different tools in the market. Now we have this Llama 70B. React is different in that it runs on premise. It doesn't need an internet connection. It doesn't even upload basic telemetry data. And that's what they're doing to try and position themselves in market as something that enterprises might feel more comfortable bringing on board and retaining in-house from a security and IP perspective. But it's still pretty new, and it's one of many tools on the market that offers this. So I would say it's optional still.
Yeah, I agree with optional. And to Paul's point about how do you as a CIO of a large company figure out the pricing and enable your developers to use these tools? I think the trend is important, but it's still in development. It's not clear how it will shake out.
All right, we will go optional here, and we will move on to the next one.
Okay. The next one is from Google. So the DeepMind team has launched a new AI model called AMIE, which is learning to diagnose patients.
So we've talked a lot about healthcare applications, obviously a hot space. This is slightly different from some of the use cases we've talked about so far in terms of drug discovery and such. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think it's optional, but man, it's really interesting. This is, I mean, all the way back to the 1960s, there's a system called Mython that was an early AI symbolic system. But DeepMind is just, it's got two competing models underneath it, and the idea that DeepMind uses that same kind of adversarial training, I think is going to be big, or opinionating. In terms of medical. And I think the other thing that we combine this with some of the stuff we're talking about ambient capture, that there's so much to be done in terms of new data, because a lot of times the advances in AI come from advances in new data and new representation, not just analysis. So I would say optional, but really important area to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'll step in here as well. The other thing I found interesting in the article was its applicability for students. How we train our medical students and be able to use. I don't know if it's pronounced Amy. I figure it was Amy because a nurse, the acronyms. But to be able to use that not just for the medical training, but even we always talk about bedside manner, right? How do you deliver bad news to a patient and do it quickly, right? Because you got to move on to the next patient and do it empathetically. So all of that, I just thought it was a pretty interesting area, where AI or products like this can help.
Yeah,
but I think optional is a good rating for this.
Yeah. Out of all the use cases we're talking about with healthcare and pharma, though, this is obviously like the most controversial, right? Now you're getting like into the diagnosis areas as opposed to some of the other areas where it's assisting with taking notes or the final readout or
Yep. In fact, the only to me, really notable thing here was they did a clinical trial, and the Amy performed better than the doctors. So it's a little bit of a stilted trial because they did it using the doctors who were the experts competing had to use text prompts, right, with the patients, because that's the way the LLM would work to make it fair. So it's a little bit squirrely. But on the other hand, it did outperform the doctors. So it's going to be interesting to see how this proceeds.
Yeah, it's interesting because in medicine, I mean, I think we have two standards of performance. One is, you can look at if you think about outperforming something that's, on average across activities, but then if you look at the risk and liability, it's very much, instance. Like, okay, yeah, you got 99,999 right, but this one you got wrong, therefore we can sue you and go after you. So it's they're two very different evaluation systems that go against medicine. Because
absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to be careful not to go from the aggregate to the individual. You have to be careful, I think, to keep people in the loop. But the reality is there are lots of adverse diagnoses or completely misdiagnoses by clinicians.
So we're used to that. We're used to human incompetence.
That's true.
And juries are particularly sympathetic to doctors, humans. But they're not. I don't think they're going to be sympathetic to software. Anyway, I think that we're going to see a lot of the innovation, just as we did in mobile, in the emerging markets, where the regulation is less, the need is high. Anyway.
Totally. All right, so we'll go optional, and we will go to the next piece on Kaj.
Yes. So this one is a sort of compilation of 16 examples from different companies which are using open source LLMs.
All right, so I'm just going to start off quickly. This was one I thought was essential. I thought that any AI leader that is working on generative AI use cases and thinking about this open versus closed source, this is a great article to read. That was my opinion. But Paul, we're going to kick off with you.
Yeah, this is great, David. I'm on the opposite end, 100% opposite. This was an article written by a reporter who went to people who sell open source and say, tell me why your open source is good. So I think I think more importantly is I think Tim and Julio and others have been very articulate in why companies should focus first on finding the right tool for the solution. And it might be open source, it might be closed source, and to get away from this religious fever debate that is so hot in the tech sector. But my view is optional.
Yeah, I just thought that it was a nice. I hear you that some of it was a little bit geared toward those delivering open source, but I thought there was also a lot of balanced discussion that helped to articulate what are the different considerations that you have when you're choosing a model. I also thought it was interesting the use cases of these 16 examples. I mean, it just kind of shows where we are. They weren't like necessarily totally transformative use cases, right? They were kind of some of the basic ones that we've been talking about for a while. So I'm curious at what others think about this.
I gave it important only. I'm sort of more empathetic to Paul's point of view at the first story, but these were named companies. These were not, we have a large customer doing X. These were named companies. And I thought it was, I think, you know, any AI leader needs a bunch of these in their back pocket, right? You need a bunch of use cases, especially if you're considering open source, it's even harder. So I thought it was important for that reason to say, hey, these open source things really are coming along. If you're considering that, it's legitimate. Here's a bunch of examples you can use as justification that other people are doing this, named people in production.
Yeah, I also rate it as important. However, it is slanted towards open source LLMs by design. But we need to put a disclaimer that it is what Paul is saying. It's really whatever is the right model for your opportunity or for your challenge. It has to be that, not just open source.
Right, but if you're considering privacy, controllability, customizing, then that's probably going to lean you towards open source, right? So you are thinking about
No,
you're shaking your head no. Why is that?
There's all. I think there's all lots of trade-offs. I think they assume that the only way you get privacy and control is to go with one open or closed source is a misnomer. And I think there's a lot more requirements. And I think I want to encourage the AI leader to be really focused on the business value and not getting into the nuances of speeds and feeds and what vector database we take. Should my tech team be using a Pinecone or not? I think to Tim's point, they should be aware that open source is credible, but I think it's a misnomer to say the only way you can solve business problems is to have a superior experience with open source technology is incorrect.
I wasn't going that far. I wasn't doing that, but I was saying that it does end up coming up as you're deciding what you're working on. But
sure, but remember, the open source models have a lot of handling that needs to happen with them. Right. So it's a level of quality of software engineers dealing with them is higher. And in fact, if you have a simple application, you don't need to go in there at all. As Paul has demonstrated, you can actually build no code application and deploy it tomorrow with the value to the business. And that's the most important value to the business in the risk considered type of way.
You know? Yeah, but I think they would think something else, which is, VMware is using open source models to control access to their code. To your point, Paul, I don't think Dave was saying, hey, look, any business value that has to whatever. This is about people who don't trust the major vendors to not open the hood and look underneath. And yeah, I think that's a good mark. But I agree with you. This is not these applications. I don't think are that impressive. So I'd have this optional because of the quality of the applications isn't compelling. I think. Even the
Matt, Tim, Tanya, Adam, what do you think?
Well, I was initially leaning between important and optional, and now I'm leaning more towards essential. Before, I can't remember who. I think John has said important is something that you should save for like your weekend reading when you have time. So I think that's probably where we should land this plane. But the comments I had to make, one is that this article is very information dense. It does a good job of framing the considerations and the landscape for open source. It has, in terms of the busy executive who's trying to make a business case at all, for AI and large language models. It has lots of use cases, lots of places they can look within their own business to try and apply these and consider how they could maybe use an open source model. It's got lots of justification to demonstrate the legitimacy of these things in enterprise. And that has a ton of big logos on it, which can really help fan the fire of urgency. I mean, VMware, Wells Fargo, IBM, the Grammy Awards, it's Intuit, it's Walmart, it's major enterprise logos. So an executive will want to be armed with this kind of information as they make their business case.
Tanya?
I gave it important because I just figure in one article they can get 16 use cases, and our leaders are in all different phases of this journey. You know, we're reviewing this every single day, but as we meet with clients, right, we can see they're not all as advanced in their AI journey. So to me, it was, hey, one article, you get 16 use cases instead of having to read 16 different articles. So go for it. So I gave it important.
Thank you. Tim, quickly, what was yours?
I said important. I'd already spoken, and pretty much what Tanya said.
Okay, so we're going important. We had a quorum there and a couple on either end, so we'll mark it as important and we'll move on.
Yep. And the next one is all the major players in the LLM space, they are moving towards developing their own chips and they are trying to cut NVIDIA's dominant share of the market.
Tim, what are your thoughts here?
So I think we can, this is, what would Paul say? This is a kind of a Barney article at one level. It's an important topic, but we've read this a million times. All the big vendors are making their own chips because NVIDIA can't supply enough of them. They're all well down the road. We'll see what happens. There's going to be more supply. Whether there will be a glut or not, we'll see, but it's definitely going to eat ultimately into NVIDIA's share, at least somewhat, and relieve the chip shortage. But it's unclear how much, because I think Julio and I and others have discussed the ecosystem around it, the programming tools and others are harder to change than the chips themselves. And there's going to have to be work done there to make these easier to swap in and out. And that's going to be the next stage. But this is just a clickbait article.
Tim, related to that, Mike online asked, shocking that we have competition in the chip market. So,
well, you have to remember, NVIDIA is a monopoly effectively right now. They completely dominate this sector. But that doesn't tend to that tends to be the case in information economies, as John I'm sure can speak to. And so it's harder to break than people think. But they're certainly going to try, and they have a lot of cash and money to do it.
Yeah, lots of competitive.
Well, and to hear about the partnerships, right? So, one big tech partnering with this AI in order to make sure you sell my chips. So I can totally see why we have all this antitrust, investigation going on, because these big techs are just so huge. They could really, push their way and take all of this market from NVIDIA just by partnering with some of those other AI vendors. I can't remember if it was Amazon who was caught with an email sending to Anthropic or something like that of, hey, yeah, we'll use you and you buy our chips.
Yeah, lots of that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two critical reasons people vertically integrate. One is, supply access. The other thing, which isn't talked about as much, is gross margin. Gross margin in NVIDIA is just over 73%. Google's gross margin is like 52, 53. So this is actually more, right now, given the supply conditions, this is actually a much more profitable market than software, than search. I mean, my goodness, it's hard to find. I mean, you got, pharma, you got chips. I mean, this is the most profitable business in the world right now that's legal, I think. And the illegal businesses generally have a lot of indirect costs, like the cost per transaction and stuff. So it's probably the most profitable business in the world at scale. And, of course, people are going to go after that.
Can we, Michael's bringing up some points online to be more precise on the manufacturing. So Michael's noting that NVIDIA is really focusing on the software and outsources the manufacturer. Is that?
Yeah. They do design, like a lot of the chip guys, right? They do design and then they outsource it. I think what's really interesting is, what's going to happen with Taiwan in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are choke points. people don't even recognize, right? Taiwan Semi, I think, manufactures 80+% of all the chips in the
70%.
world.
Yep, 70%
Yep.
actually working.
And China manufactures 85% of the key pharmaceutical ingredients in all pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
You just have to understand these things at a deeper level to get this. They're real choke points.
Yeah, that's why I think the CHIPS Act was a really good idea. Not trying to be political, but we have to, as a country, I think, I have a lot of problems with Elon Musk, but the fact that he gave America access to space again, vertically integrated, I think it's a big deal. I think chips are. I think, pharmaceutical ingredients, genetic engineering, energy. I mean, those are things you want to be, as a country the size of ours, you want to be vertically integrated, I think.
Yes. All right, we're going to go optional. Sorry, I'm playing with the layouts today to see what our options are. And the spotlight one doesn't actually seem to spotlight the person that's talking, which is interesting. Okay, I think we have one more article here today.
Yes. So the next one is from OpenAI. So ChatGPT has been found violating Europe's privacy laws.
All right, we'll start with you, Tanya.
Yeah, so I gave this important, right? I think that as leaders, it's important to know what's going on from a policy and a legal perspective. This is not news, right? OpenAI was already kind of banned in Italy last year because of privacy issues. Then they let them go back, and yes, you can make it available if you make a few modifications, but they've continued the investigation. And so this article is pointing out there are at least 6 violations, and they all seem to center around, they use, they scrape the internet, and the internet has a lot of private information of their citizens. And now you have all of this private information, personal information that has been used to train these models. And as we know, these models can make mistakes, and all of a sudden, your reputation, things can be said about you that are false, and decisions made on all of that. So I think it's an important area to be aware of as leaders, whether you're using OpenAI or not, because eventually we're going to be developing digital products that are going to, leverage generative AI, LLMs, and things like that. So being very aware of what are the rules in Europe, especially, as a multinational, I think it's important. The other thing that I found interesting in the article was, OpenAI opening now an office in Ireland so that they can kind of limit their legal exposure and kind of be in Europe. Because right now they're being, every country can put an investigation. And I think right now they have 2 different countries, Poland and Italy, looking into them. So if they're now based in Ireland, although they're saying these investigations won't be affected by that, but in the future, then it's more like the European Union, asking AI something rather these individual countries. So anyway, overall, I think it's an important topic for leaders to inform themselves about.
Yeah,
I'm okay with open, but I have laughed. It's like somebody staying in Las Vegas and saying, "Do you know that there's gambling going on in this town?" I mean, the fact that these guys, that OpenAI is violating GDPR, it's like, duh. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, I would just note that I think it looks like certainly Europe's ahead, and within Europe, it sounds like the test case remains in Italy, so they're being the most aggressive. I think France typically follows them less. The Dublin thing is every software company I know goes to Dublin when they start getting smacked around by the European ones here. I think it'll be interesting on what this is regulation on a ChatGPT, which is a closed source. I'm not sure what they're going to do when open source starts coming out more and being utilized. So,
yeah, I mean, obviously this topic is important, right? If you're using OpenAI and one of these cases results in something extreme, right? As this article points out, if they rule that, you can't have people's data in here and they can't go in and remove it, right? Like, how are they going to go in and find John Sviokla's data and just, pluck it out, right? Like, that's not possible. Like, I think, while there's lots of articles about this, I think you constantly have to be aware that you're going to want to diversify. You're going to want to keep an eye on this because you don't want to get stuck using this and it has to change in some way, right?
Yeah, I actually was on the border between optional and important, and ended up thinking optional. Here's the reasoning: is we're gonna see a lot of that, and as a business leader, you you know that there is an issue, and so you either go with it and assume that it wrestles itself down as the record industry at some point, right? As internet at some point. So it will come to a resolution, but it will take time. So, or if you're a business leader and you decide I'm not going use it, that's another option. But I don't know whether you even have this choice. So, are we going to rate important every flag that is going to be raised?
I think it's how red the flag is. Maybe
Exactly.
that will base it on our rating. So are we going optional here or important? I heard one optional, one important, one.
I'm okay with your question, Lou. I think it's
With importance, but
so important, and we'll give the proper caveats of, okay, this isn't necessarily new, but you got to keep it on your radar. How about that?
yeah, there's like 450 million people in the EU, so whatever.
All right, that's a wrap for this one, Paul. Any announcements today?
Yeah, two announcements. So thanks everyone. We had a fabulous, yet again, our Gen AI Learning Lab last night. Adam walked through some fabulous tools on creating images and doing image to video, which is stunning. So take a look at that video, which will be posted on our GAI Insights YouTube channel here in the next day. And secondly, I posted an article on my Substack about using no code. We see a tremendous increase in no code solutions. We think they're fabulous tools for companies that have zero risk pilots to learn how to use this amazing software with non-confidential information. And on Wednesday at noon Eastern, Doug Williams at MIT is going to walk through how they have deployed no code software for 3 chatbots in less than 3 hours for each one, with tremendous business value. So this needs to be aware on AI's Leaders Tool Kit that these are really great tools for learning and solving certain types of business problems.
Could I just say, Adam, you did a spectacular job. I was ready to listen to you for like 5 hours. It was fabulous.
Yes, thank you for saving me the time of having to read all the instructions on, on some of those tools and get it delivered in a more entertaining way. All right. Have a good day, everybody. We will see you again tomorrow morning.